Today we're going to start a series. It's going to go today and 4 more Sundays after this in regards to the touch of Jesus. I'm into personal touch. I like walking around, shaking your hands, getting a hug, whatever it might be. That's just part of who I am. And that's important to me. It really is. I find great encouragement from that. Many years ago, and so don't try to guess who it was, but I remember having a woman here in the church, elderly woman, and every Sunday I'd try to give her a hug. And she'd tell me, she said, you know, there's weeks that no one touches me, that no one reaches out and touches my hand until I come here and you hug me. I've never forgot that. That meant a whole lot to me. After that, she just couldn't get enough of me. I'd hug her every time I walked by her. But So it was pretty important to me. Over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about the touch of Jesus and how Jesus' touch just changes our entire life. We're going to talk about, today it's going to be his illuminating touch, illuminating touch. John chapter 1 verse 5 will say, will say this, the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has not understood it. And I believe that holds true today. It's scripture and it holds true today. There's a bright light shining in our midst, but we are so consumed with darkness that we don't understand it. And that light that shines in our midst is whenever Jesus is able to come into our life and change our life. Let's talk a little bit about light and dark. The concept of light and dark, it isn't new to any of us. We know that. Now, if you're my age or older, you're really old. Okay, but if you're my age or older, maybe we ought to say if you're 50 or older, remember those Saturday morning cowboy days? Some of you are old enough to remember, thank you, Jeff, remember those cowboy days. Now, how did you distinguish the players? The good guys wore a white hat. The bad guys wore a black hat. That light and dark type of thing, light and dark. For some of us of my generation, there we go again. Remember Mad magazine? Of course, some of you do. And it introduced us to the lighter side cartoons. Here's one, the devil with the suggestion box. So, introduced us to the lighter side. Then there was this guy come out with this movie called Star Wars. And what did he introduce us to? The dark side. The dark side. Trying to pull them over to the dark side. Some of you who are really old will remember the soap opera, Dark Shadows. You guys are really old. I don't remember that one. No. You remember Dark Shadows. Now, today we have The Walking Dead. Back then we had vampires, all right? So that was what that was all about. And then they tried to make a movie. It was never, I don't think, ever cut out to be what the soap opera really amounted to. You ever gone on a cave tour? Now, I always like these cave tours. We get down there. I can remember the last one that Trenton and I was on. And, of course, you're down there in the middle of the earth. There's no window in sight. And they shut out the lights. And then that stupid tour guide, you hear click, click like they've just dropped their flashlight. I told Trenton, I said, you get down and start looking for that thing, you know. And then they say, this is what the first cave explorers saw. Now my question is, and folks, some of you know I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, and I will admit that. If that's what the first cave tours explored, what in the world are they doing down there in the first place? There's nothing to see when the lights are out. And you're just kind of feeling your way along. Well, I've got smarter. If I go on a cave tour, I have a little flashlight in my pocket. I'm going to find my way out. Darkness is something that's very uncomfortable. Most kids are afraid of the dark. I was afraid of the dark until I was 64 years old. Okay, I'm still afraid of the dark. Kids are afraid of the dark, there's no doubt. Usually it's something that makes them very uncomfortable. I can remember back in the country where I was from, and we lived way off in the sticks, and you could, as you was go down the Blue Mound Road, that just kind of speaks for itself. We're going down the Blue Mound Road, and you'd pass this old cemetery, and the car lights would flash off of the stones. Well, there's no street lights out there, and my dad used to tell me what those lights were. And it wasn't the headlights of the car that was flashing. I want you to know that. Those were people looking for their way out. I remember that. A dark night is always made better by a bright star that's off in a distance. Darkness is usually associated with evil, foreboding things, fear, and uncertainty, while light is reassuring and confidence. You never hear anyone say whenever you're having that life and death experience, go towards the dark, go towards the dark. I had someone not long ago say, if I was having that life and death experience, isn't hell supposed to be full of fire and bright? I said, go towards the dark. But you never hear that. We have new lights in our hallway in the back. I really like that. Those old lights were about like walking around a candlelight. It's much better. If you've not been back there for a while, it's not near as scary as it used to be, unless you're going down my hall, then it's scary. Light and darkness is used throughout Scripture. And today we're going to do a little bit of a contrast of understanding some of that. Jesus, folks, had an illuminating touch. He would light up your life. And it hasn't changed. His touch today is just as vital as it ever was. His touch brings hope. Every one of you, if you have Jesus in your life, your hope has grown and increased, whether you know it or not. It's much better than it used to be. He's that light on a dark journey. He's that bright spot in our dark day. And we all have those. When darkness prevails, we just refuse to see things that are there before us. We may refuse to see the wrongs, the hurts, the damage that we're doing to others because darkness has overtaken our life. Now, if you think that's not true, let's bring it into modern day culture. There's not a home in this church, not a single family here in our church who has not been affected by the drug culture. All right? Everyone has. Now, if we don't think that whenever darkness prevails, if a person is totally hung up and caught up in drugs, they're not really caring how much trouble they do to mom or dad, grandpa or grandma, neighbors. They don't look at that because they're focused on the darkness and it is concealing in their mind what they do. But Jesus brings a light into our life. So the touch of Jesus is very illuminating. Let's start out by talking about when the light prevailed. I'm sorry, I got the wrong page there. We're going to talk about when darkness prevails. Whenever darkness prevails. Now, whenever darkness does prevail, there's some things that are just very frightening about it. Page 3 is missing. Oh well, you're going to get it anyway. Whenever darkness prevails, it's a scary time. It's a scary time in our lives and in every way. Let's talk about what are the deeds of darkness. Romans chapter 13, verse 12. The night is nearly over. The day is almost here. So let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. The deeds of darkness. What are those deeds of darkness, folks? Do you ever think about it? What are the deeds of darkness? Well, you can look into the Scripture and you can find the deeds of darkness. They're recorded for us. You can find it over in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, I believe it is. And you're going to see that there's a whole list of deeds of darkness that are there for you. Deeds of darkness that are scary to us, that are overwhelming to us. But I don't want to know what they are. I don't even want to know what your deed of darkness that you've been forgiven of. Now, everyone catch this. Every one of us have got some deeds of darkness that we've already gone to the Lord and said, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry I was caught up in that. I'm sorry that I was involved in that. I'm sorry. Every one of us got them. Whether you like it, whether you don't. There was something in your life that would qualify as a deed of darkness. Maybe it was something as we look back on we're ashamed and we've gone to God and we've repented and we've looked for help and we've looked for His forgiveness and we know it's there. I want to talk to you about that deed of darkness that still haunts you. The one that you're still battling with. The one that you're still fighting with. Many times Christians still have them. Now, we may have talked to God about it, but we still have this deed of darkness from our past that is trying to pull into our future, that is trying to creep right on into today's life. Every one of us has got those battles. Now, sometimes we like to think that we don't, but every one of us has got those battles, those deeds of darkness that are just overwhelming to us. Just overwhelming to us, and they're frightening to us. Matthew chapter 15 and verse 14, it says, leave them that they are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both fall into the pit. There we're going to talk about blind leading the blind. And sometimes, whenever we are in that dark area, where do we look for help? Often it's someone that's in that dark area with us. You will find that people that are in drugs talk to people that are in drugs. People who are caught up in a sin talk to people who are caught up in a sin. Sometimes we become blind guides. We're not able to even find our own way out, let alone help someone else. So whenever darkness prevails, folks, we are in a mess. Now here's the good news, and this is where we're headed. Good news. Jesus is an illuminating force. He put a light in your life to help you lead you out of where we are. So the touch of Jesus is illuminating. Now what can we do with that? I can see my failures. I can see my failures, and you may say, well, now wait, why do I want to see my failures? Folks, all of us at any age should be wanting to make our life better. And if I don't see what I'm falling over, if I don't see where I'm stumbling, if I don't see where I'm failing, how can I get better at that? How can I get better at dealing unless Jesus is putting a light upon things and all of a sudden I realize, I really don't want to be involved in that. I really don't want to be in that spot. So he helps me see those places where I am failing. It's a main reason that people don't like the light. It's because the light is a convicting force. A convicting force. Do you ever had one of those moments when it was just like an awakening? And all of a sudden you realize, I've been hurting that person, or I've been abusing that person, or I've been mean to that person, and I wasn't even realizing it. Or I've not been a good steward of my money, or I've not been taking care of my family, or I've not been doing this. And all of a sudden it's just like a light comes on. And it's revealed to you. That's the light of Jesus coming into your life. And every one of us need that. That's the illuminating presence of Jesus. Now, whenever he does that, of course it convicts me of those failures. But he's not necessarily doing it to beat me up. He's doing it to reveal it to me so that I can make changes. Today we're in a world that is so used to everyone else doing stuff for them. And that's just really how it is. We want everyone to take care of everything, and we just want to cruise along. Do you ever suspect that God reveals those failures to you so that you can take care of them? And many times as Christians, we're saying, God, please take care of this. Maybe he's saying, I'm doing my part. You take care of it. Maybe it's time that you step up. Maybe it's time that you show a change. That's when God is revealing my failures to me to help me do this, to help me get a grasp on it, to be able to get a handle on where I need to be. So he reveals them to me. See, the fear of the dark side doesn't have to be there because Jesus will light it up. John chapter 3, verse 19. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. You get that? That we're often afraid to come into the light because we don't want everyone to know those evil deeds. Those things that we have realized. And you know who knows them? Your friends may not know them. If they do, they already know them folks. But all of a sudden, I don't know that I really want to be accountable to Jesus for those deeds. That's scary, that he might hold me accountable for them. I don't want them exposed, so I think I'm hiding them from God. Folks, you can't hide these things from God. You can't do it. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what he has done has been done through God, that my improvements have been done through God, that they've been done through God. So I want you to consider with me now that he helps me see my failures so that I can deal with them, that the light has opened my eyes to the obvious. Now get this, the light of Jesus also opens my eyes to that is not so obvious. Sometimes we have things that are not so obvious to us, and they're still sin. Maybe it's because that's the way we were indoctrinated as kids. Prejudices that we were indoctrinated with as young. And all of a sudden our eyes are open to it and we're thinking, that's got to be cleaned up. Can't have that. Can't do that. We live in a world that is changing, that has sensitivity that needs to be seen. Maybe God has opened our eyes to some of that. You know, there's a lot going on in the religious world, and not only in the world of Christianity, but throughout the world of various religions. Now I want all of you to stop to think about, just for one moment, and by no means am I promoting this, but I am promoting that you do what I'm going to ask you. Do you ever think about how devout we feel as Christians? I love the Lord with all my heart. I'll give him all that I have and I'll work hard at it. Have you ever met a Muslim that feels the same way? Well, they do. Most of us, if you are 50 years or older, was never exposed to Muslims before until the last few years. Southern Illinois, we didn't have any that ever we knew about. Was never exposed to that in school. We were never exposed to much diversity in school. We were just a farm community, and that's all we ever were, and that's all we were ever going to be. It was just pretty amazing, the things that all of a sudden the world started changing. And what had once been a great big world that had been divided into segments, all of a sudden it's all come together. Now that doesn't mean that I have to agree with or condone everything, but it does mean that my eyes have been opened, that there's others out there. And maybe I don't agree with how they worship. And I don't agree with how they worship. But I do agree that God wants me to give my best of who I am. That I have to at times be sensitive. In order to win people, we have to be sensitive to them. The second thing that we can see is I can see my blessings. Because of the light of Jesus, I can see my blessings. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 19 will say this. And my God will meet all your needs according to his riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. That he's going to meet all of my needs. We all have blessings. Now appreciate them. Sometimes we are looking for just a certain type of blessing. Maybe it's financial. Everyone wants to have a little bit more money. So sometimes we think that's the only type of blessing that God can give out. Before my illuminating touch of Jesus, before Jesus come into my life, and before he brightened up my life with things that I'd never seen before, I look back on some of my high school days and those early days and realize that I really had tunnel vision. I didn't realize how blessed I truly was. I didn't realize what a great blessing it was to have my Grandma Pickle in my life. You know, this was the woman who was always going to pray for me to be the preacher. And this is the woman who was always going to make us pray before we would eat. And this is the woman who was going to make sure that if you spent the night on a Saturday night, you're going to church on a Sunday. Anyone else have grandma like that? Well, of course you did. A lot of us did. They were special. I just call mine Pickle. But they're just very special. Very special people. Little did I realize back in those days what a blessing that was. I just kind of took that for granted. My grandma was just a special old woman, and I just took it for granted. It wasn't until years later that I started realizing just how special she really was. Now I want all of you to think about not only your relative, but someone that's been in your life that really didn't make the big deal about church, but you knew they were Christian by the way they lived. And all of a sudden, now you can look back and you can see, I kind of took that person for granted. I probably didn't appreciate them as much as I should have at the time. I can remember my boss at the gas station. I loved working there. He was such a good man, and I loved working there, and he loved me like a son. And he come to me and he said, Mike, the day that you'll go to church with me, we'll start closing down on Sunday. I said, Sonny, don't ever worry about closing down on Sunday, because I wasn't planning to go to church. It just wasn't going to happen. And I remember how important he was in my life. The more I grew in the Lord, he was a very important part of that. And it was very special to me. And I'm very thankful for that. I want you to take time to see your blessings. And folks, if Jesus is not in your life, you don't see them. You may once in a while have one that just jumps out at you, but you don't see those everyday blessings. I read this statistic this week and it really upset me, so I'm throwing it into my sermon. See, the truth is your life really does matter. If you are a Christian and you're living for Christ and you're doing your best to be an example to someone out there, your life matters. And if you're not a Christian, your life still matters because God has given that to you to do good things with. This is terrible. There's one suicide in the United States every 13 minutes. Every 13 minutes. That's 113 suicides every day. That's 40,000 a year in the United States. Isn't that scary? I find that very scary. Now get this, if you think that's scary, there's 800,000 a year in the world that will take their own life. Now, some of those are related to drug problems and things of that order. I realize there's a lot of factors that go into that. But when I read that, it really upset me. Because that means someone hasn't seen their blessings. They haven't seen how God has blessed their life. The light of Jesus is not shining brightly in their life. Folks, it's so important to let Jesus illuminate your life. He provides love and hope and concern and kindness. And His light reveals things to us. Finally, I can see my way. Proverbs chapter 2 and verses 6 through 8. For the Lord gives wisdom, and from His mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He holds victory in store for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk as blameless. For He guards the course of the just and protects the way of His faithful ones. Because of the light of Jesus, I can see my way. He gives me wisdom and understanding. Now please take note. Write this in the margin if you have to. Just because we see our way doesn't mean that life is easy. We are all confused in our world that just because I put Christ in my life, that my life is just supposed to become an easy move, that it's a flow, that everything is really good. That's not true, folks. I've been telling you this for a long time. Life is life. And there's times it's tough. But what He does do is He gives you strength to deal with it. He gives you a light to see where that next step is. He gives you the ability to be able to look a little farther than just right here. I can see where walking with Him, I have some hope. He lets me see my way, and He lets me see clearly that way. He gives victory for the upright. Now, just because you're upright doesn't mean life got easy. It just means that you're doing your very best. It's those contributing factors on the outside that sometimes make our life so difficult. Sometimes it's just those things that we have little or no control over that just makes life tough. But that doesn't mean that I have to not be upright in His sight. It doesn't mean that I quit praying just because things didn't go the way I want them to. Things don't always go my way. I know most of you don't believe that. But things don't always go my way. Sometimes it's just tough. Sometimes it's just tough. It says that He's a shield, that He's a guard, that He protects. There's times when those fiery darts of the devil are coming my way and He's a shield that is taking care of it. There's a time whenever I'm going down a path and I'm not for sure where it's at and He's the guard in front of me. There's times whenever I feel the enemy is attacking, but I have a hedge about me because He is my protector. He illuminates my path for my journey. Doesn't mean that it's not dark around me. It just means that He illuminates my path where I can see where I'm headed. He brightens my entire life. There's times, at least for me, and maybe for some of you, that whenever life isn't easy, we get down the dumps, we get depressed, we get discouraged. A lot of people deal with those issues. Not just me. There's a lot of people that deal with those issues. But whenever Jesus is in my life, that doesn't mean all that darkness has gone away, but it means that He's got a bright spot around me. And I can deal with it. And it doesn't mean that I can see from here to that pole, but it means that I can see from here to this step. Because He's right there. Do you ever have to take just one step at a time? One day at a time? Sometimes we just take one moment at a time. But He will give you the light to see that next moment. He'll give you the light to help you with that. So our God lights up our life. He gives us the light that will shine. He lights up my failures so that I can correct them. He lights up my blessings so that I can appreciate them. He lights up my way so that I can see my way clearly on where I need to go. Our God has an illuminating touch. Matthew chapter 5, verse 14. We have a choice of light or dark. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Jesus is our light, folks. And it can't be hidden. Now everyone follow, hang on just a second. You're a good person. You're in church, you're making an effort. You're working to make your life better. But your light is like this. But if you'll let Jesus come into your life even fuller, your light is like this. He will move you from this to this. You will become a bright force to be reckoned with. And you know, it's not because of you, but it's because you are reflective of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. You are reflecting the light that Jesus has put upon you. Now, here's how you reflect that. Because you are reflecting that. Let's just stop for a moment. If you've had to deal with, I deal with a lot of bereavement, so I'll use that as an illustration. If you've had to deal with death or bereavement, and you are the Christian that's there, who is the one who is giving them hope? It's you. It's you that is telling them that in my Father's house are many mansions. It is you that is saying, I've got a God who is filled with grace and love. It's you who is able to say, oh, our God, He's going to help this dark moment. It's you who is saying, yea, though I walk through the valley, there's a light that will help me through that valley. And we call Him Jesus. Every one of us has been in that valley. Every one of us. And some of us have stumbled through it. I can remember before Jesus a time or two when I had to be in that valley. I can remember losing a high school friend while we were in high school and I wasn't walking with the Lord. That was such a dark time for our circle of friends. There wasn't anyone in that circle that knew the Lord. That was a dark time. But I can remember the next year after graduation we lost a friend, and there was me and a couple others who had found our way to the light. And you know who they asked? The ones who find their way to the light. So I want to encourage you folks. The very first touch that we're talking about today is the illuminating touch. Have you allowed Jesus to brighten your life? Have you allowed Him to light up your path? Have you allowed Him to show you your blessings? Have you allowed Him to help you deal with your failures? He will light up your life with His touch. Will you please stand as we have our invitation?